We will get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation on World Mental Health Day. To kick things off, we've got a good crowd of folks in the room, really exciting panelists. I would love it if everyone could say hello and jump into the chat and introduce yourselves there. Let us know where you're tuning in from and how you're approaching this conversation. Are you an elected official? Are you a candidate, political staff, civil society? Let us know down in the chat. My name is Jordan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nominee. Nominee is a membership platform on a mission to encourage more courageous, compassionate, and ethical leaders to run for office by empowering them with comprehensive training and resources through every stage of their political careers. The theme for this year's World Mental Health Day is prioritizing mental health in the workplace, and there couldn't be a better topic for us to explore in the political context because it's clear that there is urgent work to be done at a systemic level to better ensure that Parliament and our provincial and territorial legislatures are safe, healthy, and inclusive workplaces for elected officials and staff. And we know that's not currently the case, at least not for everyone. According to research from the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, close to half, 46% of female politicians surveyed, reported that they're considering leaving office due to the abuse, threats, and harassment they receive on the job. And it's not only women. In the same survey, 39% of male politicians said that they're also thinking about leaving due to harassment. So this is an issue that is across the board. And what's more, in a global survey from the Apolitical Foundation, 41% of politicians surveyed reported their own mental health as being low or very low. That's on par with the mental health scores reported by first responders, like paramedics, police officers, firefighters, frontline workers in crisis situations. Of course, we know that being a politician has never been easy, from being subjected to intense public scrutiny in an increasingly toxic and polarized environment to the unrelenting pressure and long hours with little semblance of work-life balance. And of course, that's not to mention the impact of social media and everything that comes along with it. So to start things off, I've got a question for you. In a moment, you'll see an interactive poll pop up on your screen. I've just outlined a few of the stressors that impact a politician's mental health, but what stands out to you? What do you feel is the most pressing issue that is affecting and impacting a politician's mental health? Is it option one, online harassment? And Josh, if you could pop up the poll for me. Online harassment and abuse, long and intense work hours. Number three, lack of support and or resources. Or number four, polarization and incivility. You should see that poll pop up for you in a moment, and you can submit your answer through the poll. So results are already pouring in, and I mean, it really speaks volumes. We've got 29% who say online harassment and abuse is the biggest stressor impacting politicians' mental well-being. 22% say long and intense work hours. 0% say lack of support and or resources, and a whopping 53% say polarization and incivility. Really illustrates the challenges that we're faced with, and a lot of the work that needs to be done to better improve conditions for both elected officials and staff as we think about how to create a more inclusive political environment. It's no wonder why, looking at these results, that it's become harder and harder not only to recruit people to run for office in the first place, particularly women, particularly folks from underrepresented and marginalized communities, but it's also become harder to retain good people into office once they're elected. This is an issue that is mission critical for us at Nominee as we think about how we can best support current and aspiring politicians and ultimately encourage more people to engage in politics. That's why Nominee has teamed up with the Canadian Mental Health Association to create a first of its kind mental health hub for politicians and political staff, which will launch in Canada in January 2025. The hub will be included with all nominee memberships. So for those of you on the call who are current nominee members, you won't need to upgrade or anything. You'll have full access to the mental health hub with your membership. The hub will feature online training and courses on topics like mindfulness and resilience, preventing burnout, self-care best practices, and staying safe online. And it will also connect you to a variety of mental health supports and resources in your own community. We'll be sharing much more details on the Mental Health Hub in the weeks and months ahead, so stay tuned for that. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you'd like to learn more or get involved yourself. And that's just one of the ways that we're trying to shift the political culture towards one that is more supportive, more welcoming, and more human, because it's easy to forget that politicians are people too. So we can see the impact that politics is having on mental health, but how do we fix it? How do we reverse that trend line and ultimately create safer, healthier, and more inclusive political workplaces? That is the question that we want to explore with our amazing panel of speakers today. And I hope you'll come away from this conversation feeling more hopeful, determined, and with some clear ideas and takeaways on how you can help promote mental health in your own capacity, whether you're an elected official, political staff, or civil society. Nominee couldn't be more proud to be co-hosting such an important conversation today with our friends at Equal Voice. So a big thank you to Chi, Courtney, and the team at Equal Voice for their partnership. They have really been at the front lines of this work for many years, advocating for important systemic reforms to ensure more inclusive, more effective, gender-sensitive legislators in Canada. And with that, I'll pass it over to Courtney Clark, Equal Voice's Senior Manager of Education, who will be moderating today's discussion. Courtney?
Thank you so much, Jordan. It is an absolute pleasure to be partnering with you on this important initiative, and what an honor it is to be with such amazing political superstars here on this panel today. I'm excited to jump right into it, and I'm first going to introduce you to our phenomenal speakers. But first, of course, Equal Voice is a multi-partisan national charity. We help women, gender diverse folks get elected at all levels of government, providing the tools, resources, and networks needed, whether that's through systems change research, campaign schools, and other programs. So definitely check us out. But starting off our introductions here today, I am excited to welcome our first speaker, who is Dr. Amanda Bittner, who is a political psychologist who studies elections and voting with a particular focus on gender and politics. She has worked at Memorial University since 2008, and in 2017 founded the Gender and Politics Lab, which is a hub for research and community engagement activities related to gender and politics. She has published 5 books and has substantial community activity experience. And in 2022, she was inducted as a member of the Royal Society of Canadian College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. We are also joined by the phenomenal Mitzie Hunter, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Her 30 years of leadership spans the nonprofit sector, the private sector, and government. And Mitzie has been a trailblazing track record of many successes, championing infrastructure and community improvements. She was the first Black woman to serve as Ontario's Minister of Education, and she has also served as Ontario's Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Development, as well as Associate Minister of Finance. We are also joined by Matt Jeneroux, who is the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Riverbend and the Shadow Minister for Supply Chains. He has been a strong advocate for both compassionate care and mental health supports, even launching his foundation, Hi Dad Foundation, to raise awareness for mental health in young men and dads. And this was an extension to the work he has done as the founder of Father's Day on the Hill, which is an annual Parliament Hill event. Matt is a former member of the Legislative Assembly for Alberta, and he is also the youngest government provincial politician prior to May 2015. Last but not least, we have Dale Richardson, who is a public affairs leader in Saskatchewan. And prior to joining Earnscliffe Strategies, Dale worked in public affairs for a multinational pulp and paper manufacturing company. And he has provided public affairs and communication support to industry and advocacy groups, associations, and clients across the province of Saskatchewan. Previously, Dale was the Senior Digital Media Advisor to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe and a Media and Communications Advisor for the Minister of Health and the Minister of Environment, as well as Head of Communications for the Saskatchewan Party. So with that, I want to jump right into the questions. I have a few questions based on all of your vastly different experiences on this topic. And I wanted to start with you, Dr. Bittner. Over the last few years, we have seen skyrocketing levels of harassment and abuse against elected officials. In fact, there is a Apolitical Foundation survey that stated that politicians' mental well-being in 2023, 40% of the respondents said that online and in-person harassment had a negative effect on them often or all the time. And there are coping mechanisms and safeguards that individuals can put in place, but how can legislatures and political parties better support politicians and their families to feel safe and secure?
Hi, thanks, Courtney. Hi, everybody. That's a great question. And it's funny. So as the kind of nerd in the group here, I guess, in thinking about some of these issues, I come at it from that kind of very academic perspective based on research, based on data, and so on and so forth. And so that poll, the interactive poll that Jordan just did, I wasn't able to actually answer it. But my answer was the one that 0% of people said. I said lack of resources and support was the biggest problem. Because without that stuff, you can't deal with online abuse. You can't deal with the long hours. You can't deal with the stuff that comes at you that feels really intense, unmanageable, intractable. These are huge problems. And I think the key thing here is that, politics is a job. It's a really hard job. It's a job that a lot of folks, we need these people to do these jobs. And for those representatives who are here, you know how hard your job is. And I think the average individual who is just a citizen in the world doesn't quite understand exactly how challenging that can be. And this desire to have access to our representatives 24 hours a day, whenever I send you a note, phone, text, social media, whatever. And that, sometimes the notes that you guys get are really not okay. And I think that's a really key feature here. And so with the changes in technology that we've seen, because of course, abuse towards politicians has existed since the dawn of time, right? But what we're seeing a lot more is this kind of anonymous keyboard warrior, in death threats against children of politicians being targeted in schools, a lot of attacks linked to not the work that we're doing, but who we are and what groups we come from. So you're being attacked because you're a Black woman. You're being attacked because you are larger than we think should be average, or whatever these categories may be. And these things are highly personal and highly toxic and make the job really impossible. So this question about what can we do, I think, is key, because there are things that we can do, right? And so ultimately, politicians write the regulations that govern their own behavior on a certain level. And one thing that's kind of come across or become more clear, I think, over time, is that if we are able to put the needs of the most vulnerable members of any group at the forefront. So in the case of politicians, in the case of representatives working in the House of Commons or any of our provincial legislatures, if we think about the representatives who are most recent in terms of their being there on the political spectrum, on the political scene, the folks that regular people aren't used to seeing in charge of stuff and deciding things. If we think about what their lives are like and we put that first, then we can do a better job of ensuring that we have a more diverse legislature, but B, more supports in place for those people. And so one of the things that comes to mind here, so if we're thinking about how we can ensure diverse voices are getting heard in legislatures, they need to be on committees, they need to be in positions of power, right? Because the more we get diverse perspectives, the less that what used to be okay is now okay, right? So that's one thing. The second thing that's linked to this is maybe beefing up the role of the speaker. Parliamentary decorum is a really big problem. Anybody who's gone to, question period is outraged by what goes on in there. And that behavior is encouraged, is part of the culture, is part of the way things are, and it's not okay, right? So you have leaders in governments who are behaving in ways that would be absolutely inappropriate in every other context. And we're okay with it, and we don't stop stop it. And so they're setting a model for what's okay for the public as well. These are role models, and I think that's really important. So parties can stop their members from behaving inappropriately, and leaders can stop behaving inappropriately. But in addition to that, more systems in place to allow for a healthier and a better system that focuses on well-being, which includes appropriate behavior towards one another, but also includes things like the mental health supports that Jordan was just citing, and kind of programming and access to resources that is behind the scenes. Because one of the most difficult things that studies have shown for members of parliament or members of houses of assemblies and so on is that feeling of like you're alone in this, right? You don't know where to turn, you don't know who to talk to, you're a politician, you just got to suck it up and be tough. It's really hard to be tough when you're being attacked in ways that are not about the work that you're doing. So the more that we can do to demonstrate that we're together in this and we're going to work through this and this is not okay and we all experience it. And if I'm not experiencing it, then that doesn't mean that you're not either, and it's not a problem. So trying to think about ways that we can work together. But a lot of that really is about kind of parliamentary process. And that's absolutely something that legislatures and parties can work towards.
Thank you. What a powerful kickoff to this conversation. And I'm excited our next three questions to find more about that lived experience and what you think of that. And I want to start with you, Dale, on a totally different side of it. You know, political staff are often on the front lines of attacks and harassments that are leveled against politicians, whether the staffer is managing their social media accounts or dealing directly with the public in a constituency office or events. And we talk about the mental health and well-being of politicians, but the mental health and wellness of staffers that keep politicians going is just as crucial. So could you talk a bit about your own experience and the impact that these challenges may have on the mental health of staffers, and how could legislatures better support frontline staff?
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks, Courtney. Great question, and thanks for doing this event. On the political staff front, the way that politics is set up, the system is we serve the public, but we also serve the people that we work for directly, which is our MLA, is our member of parliament, is our minister, is the premier, is the prime minister, and you know, to a great extent, staff are told basically in all senses, you are not the story, you are not the focus. But and for good reason, because most days we are not. But sometimes there's events, there's things that happen where we become so affected by our work and what's going on, that our mental health suffers from that. And so I mean, in my case, my last job working in official politics for Premier Scott Moe. There was a pretty significant tragedy in the province here back in 2018, with the Humboldt Broncos bus crash. I mean, I have a hard time talking about that event still, just because of how upsetting it was for people that lived in the province. But the staff and the people that worked at the legislative building, the people that worked in government, I think had a particularly tough time, just because we had to respond to it first and foremost. We were on the front lines in the sense of we were doing the government communications, but we were also seeing the people that we worked for, like the premier and ministers. They were deeply affected by it, you know, in the sense that they were, you know, it's not usual to see politicians and the premier and senior cabinet ministers crying and having really difficult days. But that's what we saw. And for me personally, I saw that, but I was also in charge of the Premier's social media, which, as has been alluded to already, that's a whole other kettle of fish, where you're not just seeing, you know, the very kind of sad and solemn tributes and comments going in, but you're also seeing some of the really terrible and really crummy comments that people make, even in times of tragedy. So I, at that time in my life, because just maybe it was just from working in politics, my mental health was not great to begin with. So having to see, you know, this kind of perfect storm of sadness and despair in the province was really hard to work through. So, I mean, one of the things that I would just say from a staffing point in terms of how can we fix this in politics is we need to have mental health leaders that work in politics, and by that I mean we need chiefs of staff first and foremost, I think, to be mental health leaders. We need senior staff in the prime minister's office or in the premier's office or in the opposition leader's office. And by mental health leaders, I mean people that empower themselves and their staff to take care of their mental health, to understand that if you are having a hard time, if something really bad happened in the province or where you live, and you are having to deal with that and you're on the front lines of it, I am here to help you. I understand what you are dealing with. I can see that you are having a really challenging time right now. And to be able to tell that person, that staffer or whoever it is, it's okay if you need to take a day or if you need to take a few days. And I've mentioned him before, but my boss when I was in the premier's office was Paul Tyon, who people know in conservative politics now, I think. And Paul was that person for me. He said, Dale, I know I can see you're going through a hard time right now. If you need time to go home for a few days to recover, you can do that because ultimately mental health is no different from having COVID, having a broken leg, having a sick day. So people need to be mental health leaders in politics.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it, Dale. And you see that theme of shared responsibility just between those first two answers. Mitzie, I have a question for you. You as a former Ontario cabinet minister, as an MPP, you've experienced firsthand that often combative nature of question period and political debate and discourse at Queen's Park. So going from the outside of harassment and kind of looking in within the legislature. A few years ago, Equal Voice, we released a report on gender-sensitive parliaments, and partnering with Samara Centre for Democracy, we surveyed MPs specifically around this kind of behavior, and we learned that 67% of women MPs reported gendered heckling versus 20% of their male counterparts. Did you see something similar to that? And how do these and other factors like heckling impact a politician's mental well-being?
Okay. Thank you so much, Courtney, and for this invitation to be part of this wonderful panel. And when I got the invitation, I had to read it twice. I'm like, people really want to know about how politicians are doing. And, it's not a question that we're ever asked. We don't have a playbook that tells you how to be a politician. I can tell you, because when I was elected in 2013, there was no playbook. You just go and do it. So really want to say thank you to Equal Voices for your work. And certainly, Jordan, I'm going to share the resources you have shared around Nominee because it is needed. I also want to say, Dale, my heart goes out to you and everyone in the community that was impacted. And I believe all Canadians actually experienced some trauma when we learned of what happened with the Humboldt accident. And it's really good that a memorial is now going up and that healing is continuing and some remarkable things with survivors as well. We're so proud of you and just want you to know that. On World Mental Health Day, I want to just shift a little bit to some lighter stories. So I grew up in a family with 3 brothers and me as the only girl. So learning how to heckle and get over teasing and give it back yourself was something that I learned in my family. They still do it today. They don't care what position I have or what I've done. All they know is that I'm their little or big sister, and that's it. And so I was really, when I started as an MPP and sitting in the chamber, it's this very regal environment. And as I said, there's no playbook. No one really tells you. But I learned how to heckle from the masters. Jim Bradley, the dean of the legislature, he would sit in front of the speaker and heckle, but you would think it was coming from across the room. I'm like, how did he do that? And someone else would get called out instead of him. And so I asked my colleagues, I asked Brad Duguid, David Zimmer, how do you do that? Because I wanted to know how to heckle. So I learned how to do it from these colleagues. Deb Matthews, she was the deputy premier, so she really shouldn't be heckling, but there were times she would pick her moments. And, when it's done right, it adds to that sense of, we're in this, we're in the fight, but at the same time, we want to do better for the people we represent. And that's when it works well. When it doesn't work well, like I experienced when I was in opposition, there were 2 times I had to go to the speaker for support because I felt that I wasn't being heard. And there was an occasion where I was being heckled so badly during the posing my question that I could not see this or hear the speaker because the members blocked me. Actually, they stood up, they blocked me, and I said to the speaker, if I can't see or hear you, I am no longer effective in representing my constituents. And to his credit, the speaker did address that decorum and spoke specifically to the fact that the member has to be heard and always be able to see the speaker. Another occasion was more personal in terms of a heckling attack. I was in a debate, so it wasn't during question period where most eyes are on you, and I was heckling because I didn't agree with what was being said. And one of the members actually said, Mitzie, and they use my name, which you're not allowed to do in the legislature. You should use the members' riding or their position. And he said, act like a lady. And I stopped because, it was a very gendered comment. And as a woman who is of intersectionality, as a Black woman parliamentarian, if I was to unpack what it means to act like a lady, it was not a compliment. And so, I thought about what to do. And why was I singled out? Because I wasn't the only one heckling. My other colleagues were heckling as well, and members of the other party was heckling. So why was I being called out like this? And it bothered me because I felt that I was uniquely being silenced, and I addressed it. I addressed it in my own way through, we don't have very many recourses. We have party recourses. We could go to the party leaders, but that wouldn't affect the opposition party or the opposite party. So I ended up taking this to the speaker and asking him to specifically address it with that member, because I felt that we shouldn't allow that to spiral into more serious concerns. So heckling, when used right, adds to the spirit of what we're there to do, but we can't pass the bounds of respect. And in the poll that was taken, 53% of those listening talked about the polarization and just what is taking place, and what we have to do is try to bring people together, try to find common ground. I'm very proud of one of the all party bills I participated in with the government and all of the opposition parties, including my party, which was to recognize August as Emancipation Month. It was something that we were able to sort of stand in agreement and say, yeah, as a province, we can unite, we can do the right things together, and more of that is needed in our parliament.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Mitzie. And that's so true. One of the best ways that you can really form multi-partisanship and move the needle forward is finding those areas where you can hit common ground and then working from there. So I appreciate that. And Matt, first off, congratulations, recipient of the 2024 CAM IMH Champions of Mental Health Award. Matt's going to be sneaking out before the end to go accept that. So thank you for being here. And I would love to know, because Matt, you're currently a federal MP, but you were also a provincial MLA in Alberta. So you've seen both of those spheres of politics. And what do you think about Mitzie's responses to heckling? Is there a legitimate role in debate for that? Should it be banned? Are there alternative measures that could be implemented to improve decorum in question period?
So I don't know what Mitzi's talking about. I've never heckled in my life. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Of course, every politician does it, and it's in terms of what I guess the end result is there the intent to create the chaos? Is there the intent to keep a calm legislature? I think each politician would have a different answer to that. Yeah, I appreciate what you guys are doing here, Jordan and Nominee and Equal Voice, to be included with all these tremendous people is a real honor of mine. So thanks for including me. Yeah, when I was in the Alberta legislature, I actually found it a lot more disruptive in terms of the heckling than when I came to the House of Commons. And I've shared this story before, and people go, "Really? Like, what's the difference?" And it's actually the smaller legislature with 87 members of the Alberta legislature. There's 338 of us here in the House of Commons. You can actually hear what people are saying. You can actually hear the quote unquote personal attacks. So it's a lot more disruptive here. Almost it's kind of like white noise to be honest with you. And from that perspective alone should tell you enough of how I guess effective ultimately it is. If the person that you're heckling can't even hear you, then it's what's really the purpose of shouting I guess across the aisle. But I will say, I worked for a premier, Jim Prentice was his name, a real, to me, somebody who was a mentor for a long time in my life. And he used to say, we were in government when I was in the Alberta legislature. He used to say, it is good for us for politics to be boring. You want to show up in the government and everything be boring. So, do what you want, give your speech what you want, but everything is boring. When in opposition, the more of the intent is, okay, well, we want it to be chaotic. We want the government to have a difficult time and what their approach on certain bills or legislation is, because we don't agree with it. So I think the where you sit in the House or legislatures has a real impact on what that I guess your behavior, decorum, and whatnot. And that's unfortunately what I think a lot of people see about politics. They don't. My committee I sit on isn't something that suddenly people tune in and I can't wait to see what's happening on International Trade Committee today. They tune into question period, and question period is the most combative aspect of our job. And the two sword lengths historical nature of legislatures and Parliament has us in that combative nature for historically for a reason. So to not see all of the quote unquote good stuff that happens outside of committees, in my office, I often have different parties pop in just to say hi. Like, there's a lot of that collegial nature to what Mitzie kind of alluded to, and you pass legislation together. Like, it works, but the stuff that everybody sees is ultimately that combative nature. And I think, yeah, absolutely, it turns people off. I've been embarrassed to have people up in the audience watching when certain colleagues on all sides of the aisle will say or do certain things, because, yeah, ultimately it's not good decorum, it's not good behavior a lot of the time. So it's just unfortunate, I guess, they don't get to see all of the other stuff along with it.
Yeah, that's so true. And the more that I have been behind the scenes and getting to know politicians across Canada through Equal Voice, that is something that I see time and time again. If the question period is the only thing you're paying attention to, you are absolutely going to be outraged. Doesn't mean it's right, but if you're watching committee meetings and you're seeing the day-to-day, there's actually a lot more multi-partisanship and collaboration across the aisle. So I'd love to just see that on a more public stage. So it doesn't turn off so many people from wanting to get engaged. And rolling into that, this is a question for you, Dr. Bittner. One of the ways that have reduced heckling in the past when we were going through COVID lockdowns was that move to a virtual environment. And a hybrid parliament federally became a permanent feature following the lifting of the lockdowns in 2023. This, along with the introduction of parental leave in 2019, has created also a more flexible environment for parents and caregivers serving federally, not just in reducing the more negative forms of heckling. So additionally, it reduces intense travel demands. Politicians are in their constituencies more often, late hours aren't as bad, and provides flexibility for illness and exceptional circumstances. So we actually partnered with Abacus Data a little while back to see how the public felt, and more than 2/3 of our respondents are all for hybrid government at all levels. And the results also showed through our partnership with Strategy Corp that political will is the key ingredient to advancing a hybrid uptake. And hybrid is not remote work. It is a much different thing. The definition is important. So despite all of this, the uptake in modernized legislatures and hybrid parliament is much slower at provincial and territorial levels. I know BC adopted it in the spring of this year, but that seems to be it. So in the meantime, what are some other ways that provincial and territorial legislatures or parties can prevent burnout or sustain mental health of their politicians and staffers?
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, the research is pretty clear that hybrid parliaments are a good thing, and for multiple reasons, and you've cited a lot of them. I think, caregiving is a big piece of that. And I think traditionally we think about caregiving as being, parents taking care of their children, but increasingly the sandwich generations, a lot of us have a lot of different caregiving responsibilities. And so this is not a thing that just makes parliaments better for moms, but it makes parliaments better for everybody and all their various concerns. And I think that, the point that you made about being able to be in your constituency more with less travel time does allow for better representation for constituents for the most part, more access and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot to think about there for provincial governments to consider it. One of the things I wanted to sort of touch on, though, because you talked about burnout and mental health for staff, and Dale's talked a little bit about that. It's great to hear your perspective. And I think that a lot of the time we forget to talk about staff. So I'm really, really glad that we're talking about staff today, because they kind of keep things going and make everything run. And two kind of thoughts come to mind based on some research that's been done at the University of Calgary. There's a graduate student there who's doing some work on staffers and mental health and challenges in the workplace and so on. And one of the suggestions that's come out of that in terms of solutions is centralizing HR, because staffers run the show. Most staffers are actually women, not all, but many of them. And those staffers experience a lot of abuse, a lot of harassment, a lot of burnout, a lot of mental health challenges. There's this idea that, politics is a job, like I mentioned, but it's a different than normal job. Like, there's a lot of pressure placed on politicians to be accessible and so on, and to work ridiculous hours. And those pressures are then placed on staff, who then are working those same hours and for terrible pay for the most part. And it's a pretty tough job. And if you are the frontline worker who's going to get all of the texts and all of the social media notes and everything else, you're filtering a lot, and that's a really hard job. At the same time, we all know it's like an open secret that there are a lot of abuses that are faced by staff as a result of politicians' behavior. And so centralizing HR and thinking about that process is like, this is a workplace. Politicians are yes, they're employers, but there's more to it than that. And it shouldn't be an open, dirty secret that we know to avoid so-and-so, or we know to avoid so-and-so, and so-and-so always does these things. Like, people know this is not like top secret information. And so if we want to make sure that we maintain and retain really highly qualified personnel to do these really important jobs, we need to make sure that they're safe and that they have the resources that they need to get help, to get HR support, and so on. But because they're often hired by individual MPs or MHAs or MLAs or MPPs or whatever, members of national parliament, there's this lack of kind of formality in the world of HR that is afforded to most Canadians who work in other kinds of workplaces. And so thinking about Parliament as a place of work should be the kind of centerpiece. And this is not to say that politicians are bad, because most of them are there because they love what they are doing. They have really important goals they want to achieve, and this is very tough. And so you've got to work hard, and you got to, and I think that's really important. This is a tough job, and politicians are trying to do a lot in very little time. But there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much staff time that can go around. And if we're not treating staff well, and if we're not giving staff the resources they need to be healthy, yes, to take time off, but also to be able to have a healthy and safe workplace, I think that we're making for, worse policymaking down the road as our really talented staff burn out and don't want to come back. And so that's something that I think that, like other workplaces, can be legislated, can be regulated, and might change some of those, bad patterns that are taking place.
100%. And in our recent sexual harassment work, that's something that we've noticed at provincial and federal levels. You have the person that's elected, the people hired by the person elected, you have the people hired by the party. Where do volunteers fall into all of this on campaigns? And then you have your unionized staffers and your non-unionized. None of their HR policies tend to line up. So keep an eye out for the last phase of our sexual harassment project, which does focus on that. And Matt, I'm going to jump to you real quick because I know you got to run. I'd really love to know, you've been a key advocate in promoting mental health, particularly men's mental health, launching Father's Day on the Hill, the Hi Dad Foundation. What steps can be taken to encourage parliamentarians and staff to take care of their own mental health and support others struggling?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And yeah, sorry, I do have to run. They're waiting. Apparently, they paused the program over there to wait for me, so I will have to run. I think it's come a long way. I got elected first in 2012, came here in 2015, in here being Parliament, and I think a lot of there's family rooms now. There's a number of resources that we have through HR and to reach out to certain mental health counselors and whatnot. But it's still like what Dr. Bittner raised. It's still very much a chaotic kind of world in terms of staffers and members of parliament and how it all kind of fits together. Ultimately, my passion is men's mental health. I often share my personal story. I won't go into it here, but I think a lot of it, like, unfortunately, we're still in a male-dominated parliament, which also has a lot of pressures and a lot of stresses, and absolutely is ripe for men to feel anxiety, depression, and you countless stories. Our current health minister, Mark Holland, has shared his story publicly. There's every year we have a Father's Day on the Hill event where we invite different mental health, so like guest speakers come. But what it ends up being is a chance for people to show that you're vulnerable. I share my story. We have a Liberal and NDP, a Bloc member, share their stories, and then I guarantee you afterwards, I get about 5 or 6 different text messages from other members of Parliament saying, can we go and have a coffee? Because I just want to tell you about what I've been going through. And ultimately, is that the responsibility of other MPs to kind of do that? Like, I have no experience as a mental health counselor. I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, but it's, we're going through the same stuff, and regardless of party, there's important that I think we're there available for each other. So, it's again, if my family is doing well, then my health is well. I think I raise awareness for men, but it's often the wife or the sister or aunt that will reach out and start getting the supports, for helping people get the supports that they need. So again, I think it's a broader than just for the guys.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that, for the commitment, creating that safe and brave space for people across party lines to reach out. We appreciate that. And you go enjoy getting that award. It's well earned, well deserved. Thank you for joining us. Back to you, Mitzie. You have transitioned from making immense impact in Queen's Park to making an immense impact as CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation, which has just had a positive impact on every province and territory across Canada. Phenomenal work. Kudos to you all. How does your experience as a politician inform your current work as the CEO of CWF? And can you tell us more about the work the foundation is doing to combat violence and hate against women and girls while empowering their leadership?
Thank you for giving me the chance, Courtney, to talk about this incredible organization that I get to be part of. And the Canadian Women's Foundation, since its beginnings in 1991, really focused on equality and justice for women in this country. And we had trailblazing women like Rosemary Brown, that really formed the need for women to be safe wherever they are. And that includes being online. We cannot have a digital space that is increasingly taking over many aspects of our lives, and then women feel that it's not a space for them and opt out, because that means that it will create a wider gap. And that's what we're working so hard to close. And what we know is that, when you get to that critical mass of, when I was elected, we had 34% women in the legislature, and that was important for us. And we saw women in leadership roles. We had Kathleen Wynne as the first premier who was a woman, and these are important milestones. But what we're seeing is that women are leaving elected office and the political space in droves, and they're being sort of, the environments are negative, and they're saying, this is not where I want to be. It's not good for my mental health, well-being, or for my family. People often ask me, do you miss it? I get asked that question a lot. And of course I miss the people, I miss my constituents, I miss the impact of the work, but I don't miss the environment that is divisive, negative, and sometimes mean. I don't miss that. And so we have to work, and that's what the foundation is doing. We currently have an initiative that's actually assessing and doing research on online digital harms. And, we hope that we can share that information with these organizations. We'll certainly be sharing it across the political spectrum, because it's a nonpartisan issue. This is something that's affecting everyone in every party. And now through this conversation, we have to be reminded, even those who work to support those offices. And so we have to create those safer spaces. Another aspect of our work is creating a more positive environment by having content generated by women. So we have a feminist creator prize, and really calling out those women creators, because we need to see more women participate in the online space, generating content, but even on the back end, generating the programming that creates platforms. And so that's an important aspect of what we need to do, is to just make sure that all voices are heard and respected, and women have to be part of that. And I would love to see all of our legislatures get to parity.
That's the dream. That's the goal. That's why we do the good work we do at Equal Voice. And thank you so much for everything that you do again at CWF. You really are providing upstream solutions to the women and gender diverse folks who grow up to take on leadership positions and reach out to places like Nominee and Equal Voice. So, just thank you for continuing to be a partner in this great work. Okay. And looking at the time, we have 11 minutes left.
Can I say one thing, Courtney? I know you're going to move forward, but people want to figure out how they can get engaged and involved, and they can go to the CanadianWomen.org. And there's tons of information there and resources that they can tap into, and tools. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, check out the Canadian Women's Foundation website. There's so much good information. And just on behalf of Newfoundland and Labrador, I know that the specific supports that have come into my province over the last few years have been a world of impact. So thank you again. Check them out for sure. And Dale, just capping it off before we go to, we might have time for a question, but we do have another poll that we want to ask. But I want to know from you, you've been a long outspoken advocate for mental health and well-being. You've shared your own story. You've encouraged others to do the same through your blog, through podcasting, what have you. What advice do you have for the next generation of young staffers or anyone looking to engage in politics, and how do they protect and prioritize their mental health?
Oh, thanks, Courtney. So the first thing I'll just say as a preface to this is that my mental health or my mental health challenges will likely look different from other people, right? It'll look different from you or Jordan or Mitzi or Matt or Amanda. Mine manifest in, you know, when I am having difficult mental health days as kind of a dread or some anxiety or as malaise or maybe a sadness. Other people it's more acute. It just it looks different overall. But my advice for staff working in politics or anybody else working in politics is make a care plan for yourself. And for me it took a long time to figure out what exactly I need to do to ensure that my mental health is good or at least not bad. So when I worked in government and in politics, I was in therapy for several years. I found it to be helpful. I found it to be helpful in the sense of why do I do the things that I do, and why am I the way that I am, which is kind of more, deeper psychological stuff. The really a game changer for me was physical health. Um, just about 2.5 going on 3 years now, I sort of rediscovered going to the gym. So I found it's sort of a CrossFit style gym that I go to in town here, and that completely changed my mental health. I try to go 4 to 5 times a week. This summer, I spent a lot of time running. But I just, it has completely changed how I feel about things. It's changed my mental resilience, which was a major challenge for me, not just in my career, but in my life. Um, when I had setbacks, personal or career, I really felt those before, going back to the gym. So, and I don't really know why it is that physical activity, at least for me, is such a difference. I guess Jimmy Carr, the comedian, he once had a joke that it's hard to have anxiety when you're doing bench press and you're trying to get 200 pounds off of your body because you're just focused on doing that, of course. So I would say make a care plan for yourself, whether that's therapy or it's exercise or eating better. It's one of the things that didn't really come up today is particularly for politicians, and Mitzi would know this well, and same with Matt, is there's a lot of receptions. There's not much time in the day to cook your own meal because you're going from one meeting to the next. So you might be having kind of a bad lunch, and then you've got a reception after 5 p.m. and then you're probably going to bed at pretty late at night. So and of course social media. I mean it's such a difficult thing to put away, our phones and social media, but if you can stay off of social media when you're not working, I think that's a really important thing. So yeah, that would be some of my ideas for that.
I appreciate that. And yes, 100% therapists are just the best. Shout out to our therapists. But yeah, no, I so agree with that. And something that we actually do in the campaign school, we have a session that devotes to before your name is on the ballot. And it's around forming that care plan of the different types of instances of people you should reach out to the types of things that you set in place to make sure that you can have that stamina and endurance. Because if you're not feeling a good baseline health, it's a lot easier to become a bit more irritated or set off and do something that you might not normally do at some point. So I really appreciate that. And just looking at the time we have left, I'm going to launch our closing poll. And then I want to thank you guys for chatting. I know that Dr. Bittner and Matt had to jump off. Oh, there she's back. Yay. So just in time. So I'm going to share the last poll, and then I'm going to do a round to get everyone to give a bit of an answer to our last question. So let me just bring up our last poll here. What I would like to know is, what do you feel is the most impactful way to help promote mental health in the legislatures? So is that access to counseling and other mental health supports, social media training and resources, mentorship and community practice, or HR standards and code of conduct? I'd love to know what you folks think after this. They're coming in. We've got a lot of people with mentorship and community of practice. Yep. HR standards. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I would love to just do a little last round with a question to you all. We'll start with you, Mitzie, then Dale, then Dr. Bittner. What is one takeaway or action that each of us can do to help promote and support mental health in politics?
Well, today was wonderful. Talking about it, I think, is a great start, and humanizing politicians. And you know, really, we talked about the digital space, but people go home to their families, and how they're treated, impacts their sense of self. So I really enjoyed today's conversation. Of course, for me, it's a look back because now I'm in a totally different space. But it is important that we remember that our democracy is precious, and while it is resilient, it is fragile because it requires all of us to be part of that. And so let's strive for better. Let's strive for inviting and welcoming those who are not represented to be represented, and to be part of that space. And whether it's women or it's diverse people, it's 2S LGBTQI plus people, just create as inclusive an environment as possible in our political space, and also those, not just those who are elected and out front, but those who support as well from behind. I know I wasn't given the question about your staff, but one of the things that I remembered really importantly at the constituency level is that my staff had a file, and they would quietly collect threats, and they would keep it there because if they were ever asked, they would have to produce that evidence. And it wasn't lost on me that they had to actually review those materials, and that they were there protecting me, even though I wasn't even aware of it. And so, really working hard to protect this fragile democracy that we have, and that's so precious to all of us, is what I'm taking away.
Thank you, Mitzie. Dale.
So one of the things that I've just quickly, when I've talked about mental health and politics in the past, and I've done some podcasting work and some writing on the topic, is the acknowledgement that for those that work in it, and I think maybe Mitzie mentioned this earlier, for those that work in politics, it's a conflicting feeling because we love politics so much. Like I'm happy to be out of it, like what Mitzie said, but when I was in it, I absolutely loved it. And I still care a lot about the people that I know that are in politics, and I want them to do well. But there is this unfortunate side effect of some mental health challenges that comes with that work. So I would say I would agree with Mitzie. It needs to be talked about. Just sharing one story, or going up to people that are currently working in politics and just asking them, "How are you doing? Your work is hard. Tell me about how you are feeling, and be honest with me. Don't give me any BS. I want to honestly know what's going on." And again, coming back to what I said in my first answer, calling out people to be mental health leaders, whether it's chiefs of staff, senior leaders, at the top of governments, and politicians, and just saying, I used to work where you worked, and I can tell you that there's probably some people that are having some tough times, and in fact, you might be not having a great time either right now. So calling out people to be mental health leaders is really important.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Dr. Bittner and back to Jordan to close it off.
Thank you. I think the thing that's come through, and I think that we know, but we often forget, is that mental health is not an individual problem or a thing that only individuals can fix, right? Like what we're talking about here is systemic problems with the way the legislatures operate. It's not up to any one individual to fix that, because any one individual can't fix that. I think so unless we put pressure on politicians to fix this together, it's not going to be fixed. And so what we're going to see is a cycling through of people who are tough enough for a while, but then burn out or whatever. And that's not what we want. We want to actually fix the system to make it better for those that come after us. And I think that we can all work together for that.
All right. Well, we will wrap things up. I mean, what an inspiring way to end this conversation, with a clear call to action for each of us to continue having these conversations. As we wrap up, let us know in the chat. Drop a comment what your action item is. What is one thing that each of you will commit to help promote mental health in your own work? And as we wrap up, just a big thank you again to Equal Voice and to Courtney for leading us through such an impactful discussion. And thank you again to our panelists, MP Matt Jeneroux, Dr. Amanda Bittner, Dale Richardson, and Mitzie Hunter. This session has been recorded, so we'll be sharing the recording with everyone very soon. And be sure to follow Nominee and Equal Voice on social media. You'll find links in the chat. Sign up on our website at gonominee.com to be the first to know about future events like this and be alerted about the Mental Health Hub and other upcoming programs. And of course, you can also reach out to me directly to learn more about anything we're working on as well. But with that, I will close things off, and thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.